Committee will come to order. Put the phones on silent. There we go. I'm pleased to welcome my dear friend, Secretary Jennifer Granholm. We go back a ways, and with her and her family, and I appreciate very much that relationship. And we have you back to the committee to discuss the President Biden's fiscal year 2023 budget request for the Department of Energy. So I want to thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. The ongoing crisis in Ukraine is severe. Putin has used energy as a weapon to leverage power over European democracy and intends to do the same globally, using Russia's abundant energy resources. So far, the U.S. has taken significant steps to counter Putin's aggression, including banning the import of Russian oil, petroleum products, LNG, and coal, while also authorizing additional LNG export capacity. These are critical moves to stop funding Putin's brutal war on the Ukrainian people, but there is more that we can do and we must do. In a time when maintaining and strengthening our energy security is top of mind, I look forward to hearing more about how the administration's budget requests will help us achieve that goal. At the same time, the department's efforts to advance critical clean energy technologies from solar to nuclear energy and storage continue to transform the U.S. economy and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And you have some pretty historic new authorities and funding levels with which to do that. This committee's work product, the Energy Act of 2020, established new pathways for research and development across the energy landscape. The bipartisan infrastructure law we passed late last year was a critical step to enable us to be a leader in innovating energy technology and supplying our partners with our abundant resources. The infrastructure law provides an all-of-the-above investment in innovation, not elimination, including funding for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, hydrogen, critical minerals, transmission, energy efficiencies, clean energy manufacturing, and so much more. The Department of Energy is overseeing the implementation of $62 billion of this funding. Secretary Granholm, as you saw when you visited West Virginia in March, there is so much excitement around programs like the hydrogen hubs and the many other programs from the infrastructure law that will have an enormous impact on my state of West Virginia, but a lot of states throughout the country. We want to ensure you have all the tools and personnel you need to get that money out the door efficiently and effectively. And I look forward to hearing about the progress the department has made in implementing this historic legislation. I was glad to see several West Virginia priorities included in the department's budget request. The request includes $502 million for weatherization assistance program, which helps low-income families make lasting energy efficiency improvements to their homes, and I can tell you everyone on this committee will benefit by that, freeing up finite resources for other essentials like food and medicine. I'm pleased to see an increase in funding for Weatherization Readiness Fund, which was funded for the first time last year and will help low-income families make the repairs to their homes that are necessary to qualify for weatherization dollars. The request also supports the National Energy Technology Laboratory, headquartered in Morgantown, West Virginia, although I think this is an area of underinvestment, as you would well imagine. We are so proud of the work that Brian Anderson, Dr. Anderson, and his team do to keep us on the cutting edge of energy innovation, especially technologies that will help us reduce carbon emissions without sacrificing reliability and energy security. We also can't sacrifice the rural economies that have produced our energy for decades. That means leaving nobody behind. That is why I have been encouraged to see the administration acknowledge the contribution of these hardworking men and women by convening an interagency working group on coal and power plant communities. This working group needs dedicated funding and a long-term mission to truly make an impact on these communities who have given so much to our country. This transition will be playing out for decades. Creating new opportunities in coal communities means that we need to use all of the tools that we have, and government investment, if done right, can be one of the most powerful. Now, it is no secret that I have serious concerns about our nation's debt, and as such, take my role as both an authorizer and appropriator very seriously. I fully believe that we can get our fiscal house in order while supporting West Virginia and American priorities. I look forward to hearing from the Secretary this morning about how we can do just that. And with that, I'm going to turn over to the Ranking Member Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding today's hearing, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for testifying today. There are a few issues to me as important right now as energy, and that's the same with the American people. During your confirmation hearing last year, I said, quote, "The incoming administration should not devastate our economy by implementing policies that undermine energy production. And I meant that as a warning, but it turned out to be a prediction. The shale revolution made America the world's leading oil producer and natural gas producer in the world. It also lowered our country's carbon emissions, and many saw that as a huge success. But instead of embracing America's energy revolution, President Biden is fighting it. He has been leading an energy counter-revolution. He wants to return us to the days of going hat in hand to the OPEC cartel. American families are now bearing the consequences, and our adversaries are in the driver's seat. Madam Secretary, in an interview on Bloomberg last year, you were asked what your plan was to increase oil production. You responded, "That is hilarious." You may find high energy prices a laughing matter. Maybe the President does as well. He seemed to laugh about it Saturday night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I can assure you American families are struggling, are suffering, and they do not view these high gas prices as a laughing matter. The price of gas at the pump is up 70% since the week Joe Biden was inaugurated. 2/3 of that increase came before Russia invaded Ukraine. Residential natural gas prices are up 24% from January 2021 to January 2022. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Too many families this past winter faced the choice of whether to heat their homes or put food on the table. The White House should be encouraging American energy production. Business section today, New York Times, front page, big picture, increasing costs next in electricity. Instead of focusing on that, this administration is waging a war on America's energy producers. The administration has done all it can to block new oil and gas production on federal lands, including banning new oil and gas lease sales. A court ruling lifted the moratorium. The President's response was to slash the acreage available by 80% and make it even more expensive to produce American energy on that land. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission even tried to impose rules that would make it nearly impossible to site new natural gas pipelines. Last month, the White House repealed rules to ensure environmental reviews are completed in a timely manner. U.S. oil production is 1.3 million barrels a day below the pre-pandemic peak. We're even further below the increase in production projected a couple of years ago. In addition to helping American people, this lost production would have undermined Russia. Could have done both, help the American people, undermine Russia. But killing the Keystone Pipeline on day number 1 of the President, and that was before your nomination, before the hearings here for you, Madam Secretary, the President killed the Keystone Pipeline, banning new federal leases, undermining Alaskan oil production, and blocking energy infrastructure. All of these things have empowered our adversaries. While the President reluctantly ended domestic purchases of Russian oil, remember, he begged Russia to produce more oil when he was in Glasgow, Scotland, for the climate meeting. The President still hasn't stopped the purchase of Russian uranium. America has enough uranium to replace these imports. The administration is doing nothing to boost production here at home. Desperate gimmicks like releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve or a gasoline tax holiday will not solve our supply shortage. The solution is more American energy. Yet that's something the administration will not allow. We must make our country energy dominant again. Increasing U.S. oil and natural gas production would make our people more prosperous. It would make our nation and our allies safer. Now, the President has claimed that he isn't doing anything to limit domestic energy production. Simply not true. Look at President Biden's policies. Look at production numbers. Look at the international marketplace. Look at the statements of his own appointees. According to Gina McCarthy, the White House National Climate Advisor, this is amazing. This is after the President gave a speech, talked about energy. She went and apparently had to clean up after the President because she said, President Biden remains absolutely committed to not moving forward with additional drilling on public lands after a statement by the President. So apparently we see a lot of cleanup going on at the White House. Madam Secretary, it's long past time for the Biden administration to have an energy strategy that includes American energy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now I'd like to turn to our witness this morning, Secretary Jennifer Granholm, to deliver her opening remarks. Thank you, Secretary, for being here.
Chairman Manchin and Ranking Member Barrasso and members of the committee, it is an honor to appear before you today to discuss President Biden's 2023 budget request for the Department of Energy. I am extremely proud to lead the department as the 16th Secretary of Energy, and I'm very grateful for the support that you have given DOE, including through the 2022 omnibus legislation and the bipartisan infrastructure law. Under the Biden administration, DOE is committed to increasing energy security and affordability and resilience. We are committed to securing the clean energy supply chains that are needed to reduce our reliance on unabated fossil fuels and increase our energy independence, like the $3 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law for battery manufacturing that we announced on Monday. We are also committed to strengthening America's competitiveness by accelerating scientific discovery and innovation. These commitments are reflected in our budget, and a look around the world shows that this is the right focus with the right priorities for this moment in history. Right now, we face a trio of crises: climate change, which cost the United States $148 billion last year alone in cleaning up after extreme weather damages, then COVID-19, and now Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is costing American families right now as they see prices rising from gas stations to grocery stores. Let me be clear, the Department of Energy is using every tool available to increase oil supply. In late March, President Biden did authorize the release of 1 million barrels per day from our Strategic Petroleum Reserve over the next 6 months, 180 million barrels total, coordinating with our international allies and partners who committed to release another 60 million barrels to increase global supply. I appreciate your leadership and support of the President's ban on Russian energy imports. We're also working to offer relief to American families for home fuel costs, including through $3.5 billion for the Weatherization Assistance Program provided in the bipartisan infrastructure law. But ultimately, these crises tell us that energy security and independence and affordability all depend on a shift, yes, toward American-made clean energy. It's why we're working with our international allies to advance alternative energy sources and boost clean energy manufacturing. It's why we're grateful that Congress, through the 2020 Energy Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, has invested in building clean energy technologies here at home with American parts and American labor. I'm grateful to the members of the committee for the faith that they have placed in our department to oversee many of these investments and in the new offices and clean energy goals that come with them. The $62 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law is an historic investment in projects that will serve our nation for decades, but it is not on its own sufficient to address the nation's energy challenge, and that's why our request includes base year funding for efforts to complement the bipartisan infrastructure law and maximize its impact to lower costs and provide reliable, secure American power. The request also supports our Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, our Office of Science, our 17 national labs, which sharpen our nation's innovative capacity and competitive edge, and our budget, of course, includes funding for DOE missions that keep our country safe, from environmental management to nuclear security. I'm proud of DOE's work with our extraordinary employees to confront our nation's most pressing challenges. I reaffirm DOE's commitment to implement congressional actions from the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Energy Act, to those still to come, including the Bipartisan Innovation Act and the President's full agenda for building a better America. So thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Secretary. We're going to start our questions now, and I'll start the first round here. You're undertaking the largest reorganization since DOE's inception, at the same time that you're managing DOE's largest influx of funding. So it's a double investment. So if you can help us understand why these organizational changes were necessary, how you all came about the changes that you're making, and did the reorganization have any impact on the budget increase for the DOE this year, which means Were you just trying to match up to the money that was coming in? And what are the hiring implications of infusion of funds are you running into?
Yep.
Some challenges there. So if you can just give us a little overview of that.
Thank you for the question. So historically, as you all know, the Department of Energy has been a place for research, development, some small demonstration. What the bipartisan infrastructure law does is complete that spectrum and allows us to deploy and do large-scale demonstrations in technologies that the research and development side has been working on. So it basically takes DOE from the lab to the street. So what we want to do is to make sure that this budget really causes that bipartisan infrastructure law investment to be effective. You know that infrastructure law funding, that $62 billion, is over 5 years. So we are making sure in the DOE budget on research and development that we're able to complement it. So for example, making sure that we have the continuous research on hydrogen, even as we are going to do demonstration projects and hydrogen hubs. We have to continue to do the investment in the research and development and learn from what is happening on the street so that it can be reported back to the labs and improved upon. That's true with all of the technologies that you have authorized and funded in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So that's one thing. We have to make sure that it is implemented well. And so we've identified positions that we must beef up on inside of the Department of Energy. For example, we haven't done large-scale demonstrations. We don't have those who are expert in managing federal projects who can, other than in NNSA and environmental management, but we need those people. But we need to make sure that we've got the skill sets necessary to implement and oversee the funding that will be competitively bid out and work through the private sector. So both on the spectrum of the new wings, I mean, we basically had one wing of the airplane, which was on research and development, and now it's balanced out with large-scale demonstration and deployment with the funding that this committee has supported and certainly that the Congress has provided.
I got two more questions, but very quick. The one, I had a chance to go to France down in Provence to see the thermonuclear experimental reactor ITER. And anybody who has ever got a chance, you ought to go. It's the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen in my life, what they're doing. Multinational country, I mean, we're all over. We had 37 countries involved. And we have 9% investment. We get 100% of the technology that comes from it with a 9%. But all countries, I mean, you got from not only France, but you have China, Russia, everyone's involved. I just want to make sure that we're paying, and we have that built into the budget, that we're going to be paying our percentage as far as for full funding for the portion of ITER that I think it's about 250.
240.
240, okay.
240 million.
We're good there?
Yes, we are committed to doing that. And we, by the way, in order to support that, we build out the supply chain here and we send it there. So it's an obvious opportunity for us to create and build out that supply chain in the United States.
What it does, the scale of the it's incredible. What they're attempting to do is replicate the fusion process of the sun for the production of massive amounts of energy. This one, it's a commercial scale. It's about 500 megawatts. The temperature in the core will be 150 million degrees Fahrenheit for the plasma, for the energy plasma. It's just, I just recommend if you can get whenever you're doing a Codell, if you get a chance, just stop. It's worth seeing it. Finally, I want to ask you about, with what Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, approving the expanded exports of the 4 U.S. LNG facilities, I think is extremely important for us. However, I'm concerned about whether there's sufficient long-term certainty for the natural gas producers and exporters to ramp up. They depend on long-term contracts, as you know. We'll go way beyond 2030. But the thing I'm saying, are we connecting and working with our foreign allies that they're going to be able to match up with the LNG terminals to receive this influx that we're sending in that direction to try to give them the stability? And next of all, on that are we all making sure that we can convert that to hydrogen and ammonia as a new technology, cleaner technologies come on? So the same infrastructure, we build the gas lines here, they're dual purpose. We build the LNG terminals, they can handle hydrogen and ammonia with LNG.
Yes, part of the budget actually supports that through our Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Office to make sure that the LNG exports can be hydrogen-ready, and we're studying the materials, et cetera, the steels that are necessary to make that happen. On the first point, of the increased supply for liquefied natural gas, over 75% has gone to Europe. As you know, it's on a global market. The market has, the prices for natural gas in Europe today are over 30. I think they're 32.
Yeah, they've stayed between 29 and 32. 30.
Yeah, 32. That obviously causes supply. Long term, we've got 30 billion cubic feet of liquefied natural gas permitted, both through DOE and through FERC, that is waiting for the investment in the infrastructure.
My only thing is making sure that the infrastructure we're putting in place now, whether it be the pipelines, whether it be the transportation, whether it be the LNG terminals, whatever, are going to be able to be utilized in a multi-purpose. So with hydrogen going to be coming on strong, with the type of coating it takes for our pipelines that we need to build and complete, and all the other things. So we can move, and ammonia's great. Green ammonia's going to be great. With that, I'm sorry, I ran over time. Senator Brasso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, last month, Gina McCarthy, the White House National Climate Advisor, stated, quote, President Biden remains absolutely committed to not moving forward with additional drilling on public lands. So please give me a yes or no. Is the President committed, as Gina McCarthy states, to no additional drilling on public lands?
I believe the Department of Interior just released a plan which would allow for additional drilling on public lands.
Does the President agree with his climate advisor? That's what I'm asking. Does he confirm what the climate advisor has said, or does he contradict what the climate advisor has said?
The President has called for increased supply, and he has authorized and supported the Department of Interior for additional leasing for additional supply on federal lands. And he's called for the oil and gas industry to increase supply
perhaps the climate
on private and public lands.
Perhaps the climate advisor then shouldn't go and contradict the President after a statement that he makes. 1 week after President Biden was inaugurated, the retail price of a gallon of gasoline averaged $2.48. The week before Russia invaded Ukraine, the retail price of a gallon of gas was $3.62. It's a difference of $1.14. By the week of May 2nd, the retail price of gasoline rose another 67 cents. So we have started $2.48, Biden's increase at $1.14. You add Putin on top of that with the Russian invasion, another 67 cents. People in Wyoming are paying over $4 a gallon this past weekend. So the vast majority of the increase in the retail price of gasoline happened before Russia invaded Ukraine. It is a Biden price hike. We need more domestic production to lower the prices. 6 months ago today, you famously laughed when asked what the administration could do to increase domestic production prices, and prices have only increased since then after that point. What are you doing to increase domestic production and lower prices for American families?
We are calling upon more increased production. Let me be clear that the price increase in gasoline coming out of COVID was because the oil and gas industry had shut down production because of reduced demand during COVID. So yes, there was some increase because the supply was not keeping up with demand as the economy opened up. However, let us be very clear that it is the contraction from the loss of Russian oil on the market, which is rightful because the United States and other countries have refused to finance this war, but it has removed supply from the market, which is why the President has called for an increase in our domestic oil and gas production. The Energy Information Agency has said that we will see an increase of about 1 million barrels per day. However, Russian oil off the market has taken about 1.5 million to 2 million barrels off the market, and then the European Union action will also take an additional amount off the market. We are asking the oil and gas industry to increase supply. And to your point that you made in your opening statement, it is not government policy that is preventing the oil and gas industry from increasing supply. The Dallas Fed in March did a survey of the oil and gas executives, and they said 94% of them said that the slowdown was due to reasons other than government policy. And the biggest reason they gave is because Wall Street is preventing them from increasing capital investment in wells because they prefer fiscal discipline, which would mean that they want to see more shareholder buybacks. We want the oil and gas industry to increase production. Some are. We'd like to see more of it so that we can address the issue of people's pocketbook. The president is very concerned about the price right now because, of course, 70% of inflation is because of the price of fuel.
Mr. Chairman, let me just point out that in spite of what we've just heard from the Secretary, this administration has been actively discouraging and browbeating lending institutions to not loan money for this sort of things because they say, no, gas is going to be gone in 10 years, so go invest in a 30-year project. We've had John Kerry on behalf of the administration going out and attacking lending institutions. So then we have the FERC in here who are preventing pipelines from being built to move energy. So it's very hard to produce energy when this administration has continued to put their finger down against it. I just want to move on to uranium sanctions. As we've discussed on the phone, we need to stop funding Russia's war in Ukraine. It's been reported that even Germany, which depends on Russian energy, is backing a European Union ban on Russian uranium. President Biden can ban U.S. imports of Russian uranium today. Will President Biden ban imports of Russian uranium?
I'll let the president make that statement, but I can say that this is a point on which I think we have a lot of agreement, which is we should not be sending any money to Russia for any American energy or for any other reason. You are aware, I think, but we discussed this a little bit on the phone, that we have stood up inside of DOE under Dr. Huff a Tiger team to develop a full uranium strategy. We want to make sure, for example, that we are able to supply both HALEU as well as low-enriched uranium to our civilian nuclear fleet. And if we move away from Russia right away, we want to make sure we have the ability to continue to keep the fleet afloat. So they're developing a full-on uranium strategy that's going through the interagency process, and we look forward to briefing you on that.
And Mr. Chairman, in a sense of bipartisanship, I'm looking forward to voting to confirm
Thank you for
Dr.
that.
Huff
Thank you
today,
to this committee.
and I would encourage all of the members of this committee to vote also in the affirmative, and I'm looking forward to speaking on behalf of her nomination today because I think she's terrific and is going to be a very welcome addition. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last night, Madam Secretary, we moved to go to conference on the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. And one of the provisions in the Senate bill is providing DOE with $17 billion in increase in authorization over 5 years. Do you support increasing funding for cutting-edge R&D at our national labs and increasing the capacity in many areas to the types of research that we need to do in conjunction with what we're doing with the National Science Foundation?
Yes, ma'am. We certainly need to continue to invest in our cutting-edge research through the 17 national labs.
Okay. One of our priorities as a nation is cleaning up the Hanford Reservation. It's one of the most contaminated sites in the Western Hemisphere, and I'm disappointed that President's budget request, it's lower than the current spending level. And I believe when you were here before us, you provided information about what you were willing to support to make sure that you were meeting the tri-party agreement, the agreement that keeps milestones, that make sure that our funding levels meet those milestones on cleanup. So what is the tri-party agreement compliance number for fiscal year 2023?
The number for 2022 was $3.3 billion. Number for 2023 will be above that. Obviously, we want to complete the framework discussions with you on the budget. And we know that the number that we have requested at $2.5 billion, which is a big number, it's the biggest number of EM, but we know that this is a framework and we want to work with you on it.
So you're saying it doesn't meet that milestone, at least last year's milestone, and we need to keep working on that number?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I know you've been busy on many fronts as it relates to what's going on in Ukraine and had to pull out of a visit to the Hanford site, but we want to welcome you, the chairman, the ranking member, anytime to please visit the Hanford site and to visit the national labs that are there as well, because there's so much work going on at our national labs that we want to make sure that people, and particularly in the area of cybersecurity, their expertise is amazing, and I feel like we need to continue to do more to make sure that our electricity grid is protected. As we see from what's happening on the international front, we need to keep taking every step possible to make sure that we have the next generation of technologies to help us. I also wanted to ask you about continuing to look at ways to scale commercialization of technologies for like long-haul trucks, for example. Is there a way to construct incentives to speed the adoption of transportation electrification? We're seeing companies like PACCAR and others dealing with obviously the chip shortage, but they are helping to make a product more affordable, either in lightweight materials, but also in making sure that we have something that is a tech-neutral manufacturing incentive. So do you agree that there are opportunities for us to move more quickly in this area?
Absolutely, and I hope that Congress considers that very soon. The time is fleeting, and that's not just on battery or on vehicle manufacturing, but on the whole suite of energy generation.
Also, you provided a video. We were just out at the Grid Launchpad groundbreaking, and we hope that you will come to look at that in the future. The Launchpad, we think, is the scalable level of battery technology storage that we need to have. So I want to make sure that we are continuing to support those kinds of efforts at the Department of Energy.
1,000%, both on transportation storage as well as grid storage. Both have to happen. The Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office is doing the research on that. The labs are working. I mean, obviously, PNNL is a classic example of a lab that is being on the forefront on grid storage. Other labs are doing that as well, but they all work together. And of course, the funding that the bipartisan infrastructure law provided, both on vehicle as well as grid storage, is going to be critical in moving us forward. Thank you so much for that investment, because it will allow the technology that's being researched at PNNL and grid storage to be able to be taken to commercial scale outside of the labs.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Langford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thanks for being here in the dialogue on this. So as I look at the Energy Information Agency and some of their facts and data that they put out in the past year, they anticipate over the next 30 years an increasing demand for oil, gas, coal, renewables. They predict that nuclear is going to go down actually globally over the next couple of years, but there's a lot of issues that are there. So my question is, they're projecting an increased demand globally for oil, gas, and coal. What is America's part in that? You talked about the permitting, the liquefied natural gas, and increasing that ability to be able to get that out. What else are we going to do to help meet that demand? Because clearly we don't want Russia to be able to meet that demand and others. What are you actively putting in place, knowing that the prediction is over the next 30 years we're going to need an increasing supply worldwide?
Yeah, clearly worldwide and in the United States, I mean, the demand for electrification and for more energy generally is going up as certainly the developing world gains more access to advanced technologies, et cetera. This is really an opportunity for the U.S. to lead, not just inside the U.S., but the world. And we have done that, certainly in we are the #1 exporter of liquefied natural gas, the #1, all of that. But we can also do the same thing with nuclear technology, advanced nuclear technology, and we have partnerships with countries, particularly the Eastern Bloc, and some others around the world who are really interested in developing that. The same is true with advanced technologies related to hydrogen.
Right. All those are pretty far on the horizon at this point. For instance, we were having a conversation who we're going to vote for today, and who I'll be voting for as well, dealing with nuclear energy later on today. When she was sitting in the same chair and we were talking about this, and I asked, when's the next nuclear power plant going to be permitted in the United States? The hope was by the end of the decade. Now, I appreciate her honest answer on that, but when we talk about trying to add more nuclear in this and more of their advanced whether it be hydrogen, whatever it may be, we're decades away. As we anticipate for the next 30 years or so, and I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, this is a complicated formula. We all know where we're headed long term, but we all know it's not next year, the next year. It's a slow process to be able to get there. The anticipation is for the next 30 years at least, we're going to have increasing demands for oil, gas, coal. If we continue to allow infrastructure to be able to die off in the next 30 years, we're going to continue to have price spikes if we continue to discourage investment in those areas. You've read, I'm sure, the J.P. Morgan study to be able to look at the CapEx deficit in oil and gas especially. Just in those two areas, they anticipate in the next 8 years we have a CapEx deficit investment of $720 billion in the United States. That's a big number. That is we're not investing enough into what we know we're going to need. So the question I'm trying to figure out is, what are we doing to address that? Because if we have declining infrastructure and increasing demand, at least for the next 30 years, we have a problem coming that's going to continue to rise.
But you see, the globe is moving toward decarbonizing solutions. And so that's why what you all have provided, maybe not you, but many have provided in the bipartisan infrastructure law for the investments in carbon capture, for example, to help decarbonize the existing fossil fuel. That's what the world is asking for as well. And that's why Wall Street...
No, I get it. I'm just trying to figure out, but the infrastructure still has to be there in place. We still have to have pipelines to be able to move it.
Yes.
Again, Energy Information Agency says in the next 30 years, we're going to have an increasing demand for oil, gas, and coal.
Yes.
But we have a decreasing investment into those areas. That's a bad formula for us. That's what I'm trying to see. What are y'all doing, looking over the horizon to see how
that's what I'm saying, is that we have to provide the technology to do what the world is asking for, which is to provide energy solutions, whether they're fossil fuel-based or they're renewable-based or other clean technologies, that are moving in the direction that the world is headed, which is to decarbonize. And so for the natural gas industry, that means addressing the methane flaring and the methane leakage, so that those technologies become much more accessible and desired across the world. Those are the solutions that will help to increase the deployment.
I think we're literally talking past each other on this, because you're answering a question I'm not asking. And so I wish we had more time to be able to...
You're saying, what are we doing?
Right.
Right, what are we doing? We're developing the technologies that will make those very things that you're talking about more in demand. The reason why Wall Street, one of the reasons why Wall Street is projected to continue to pressure down on CapEx is because they too want to see a movement toward clean. These oil and gas industries, some of the businesses are diversifying into broader energy companies. Sure. But that's where everybody's going.
But it's interesting you mentioned the Wall Street thing. When Wall Street actually answers this question, they have 4 different reasons. And you said this is not what the Dallas Fed says, but when Wall Street answers the same question of why they're not doing some of this investment, one of their answers is restricted access to capital. The other one is uncertain regulatory outlook for fossil fuels. It's tough to be able to do an investment into a pipeline that everyone knows we're going to need for the next 30 years plus, because even the Biden administration's own numbers say we're going to continue to need that, but it's tough to actually do that investment.
But the point is, excuse me for interrupting you, the point is, I don't think we're talking past each other. The existing pipeline, I mean, to Senator Manchin's point, we should be investing in pipelines that are ready for the next generation technologies as well. We should be investing in pipelines that have buttoned down the problem that the world is trying to solve, which is climate change. So investing in leak-free infrastructure, making sure that infrastructure is ready to be converted. The technology solutions are how we're going to get there by decarbonizing the existing fossil fuel offerings and increasing clean and renewable.
Sometime we'll get more time to be able to clarify this, to be able to go from there. Right. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Secretary, America has dramatically increased our production of oil and gas over the last decade. Certainly New Mexico's done its part for the country there. Yet, as we know, prices of oil, fossil gas, gasoline are all at record highs. It's almost as if gasoline prices are actually a reflection of a global commodity market. Spoiler, they are. Can you elaborate on how this managed transition from fossil energy sources to clean domestic renewable energy creates real American independence and also buffers consumers from the incredible swings of fossil fuel commodity prices?
Yes, thank you for raising this. This is not a surprise that we are paying $110 per barrel today, and so are the people all over the world. This is an issue that is happening across the globe because oil is traded on a global market. And so the question is, how do we increase supply in the immediate so that we can reduce the pressure so that supply and demand can meet each other, and at the same time press on the accelerator to move toward clean? Because you do not see the volatility with electrified cars. You don't see the increases because of the access to the sun or access to wind or access to battery technology, which the price keeps going down and not up. And that's true with solar and wind as well. The smartest move over the medium and long term, and starting right now, is to diversify our energy supply and create the millions of jobs that would go with that, not just in the United States, but the demand for those products globally is going to be, by 2030, $23 trillion. We should be doing this for our own economy, for our own energy security. We can walk and chew gum at the same time.
You mentioned stock buybacks. Do you know how much oil and gas stock buybacks increased in the fourth quarter of last year in the run-up to these record prices?
A lot. Something tells me you may have that number in front of you.
According to Bloomberg, 2,181%. And we wonder why the prices are as high as they are. I want to ask you about something else. Last week, LA Times wrote a short piece about both the challenges and opportunities of building clean energy projects in the West. And when asked about the Commerce Department's investigation of the Auxin solar tariff petition, the reporter writes that you lightly slapped your forehead with both hands and looked down in a gesture of frustration. According to the reporter, you described the investigation as, quote unquote, friendly fire on the administration's clean energy agenda, and said that the Commerce Department needs to keep the investigation narrow and resolve it quickly. If that's accurate, I completely agree with that sentiment, but I was hoping you could elaborate on what's at stake in the solar energy if this thing drags on for months or years.
At stake is the complete smothering of the investment and the jobs and the independence that we would be seeking as a nation to get our fuel from our own generation sources. It is, I know it's an adjudicative process that's in the Department of Commerce, and therefore it's not in the Department of Energy's purview, but I certainly am deeply concerned about being able to achieve the goal of getting to 100% clean electricity by 2035 if this is not resolved quickly.
Yeah, I'm hearing from manufacturers, from installers, all about laying people off now, about projects being canceled. It's not up to any of us to tell Commerce how to resolve that process. However, if it's not done really, really quickly, we are going to destroy an entire industry. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Glad that you're here with us today. The last time you filled your car up with gasoline, do you know what the price, remember what the price was?
I drive an electric vehicle.
Okay. Do you know what the price of gasoline, do you know what the price of gasoline is in Washington, D.C.?
I know that on average, the price per gas of a gallon of gas today across the country is $4.25.
So it's over $5 a gallon here. When you were governor in Michigan, what was the price of gasoline the last year you were governor?
I don't know. It was a lot less.
Probably around $2, $3 a gallon, something like that. Back home in Michigan, I assume you still have lots of friends back there and you guys have relationships. What's the number one concern of people back home?
It's not just back home, it's across the country. The number one concern is inflation, and that is fueled by the price of fuel.
Okay. I took Economics 101 from my track coach in college, so I'm sure it wasn't quite the Econ 101 of some of the bigger universities, but he taught me that if you, all things else being constant, if you decrease supply, the price is going to go up of any product. Would you agree with that?
If you increase supply, the price.
If you decrease supply.
Decrease supply, yes, the price will go up, yep.
Okay. Have your policies resulted in decreasing supply of oil and gas?
No, sir.
Okay. We were making 12 million barrels of oil per day, 2019 pre-COVID, and now it's 11 million barrels per day. Why have we stopped producing that much oil? What's happened then?
You say you mean why has the oil and gas industry stopped producing that? It is because of the fact that during COVID, demand went down, so supply went down. Wall Street, as we've been discussing, has demanded that there be fiscal discipline on the part of the oil and gas companies when it comes to reinvesting that. And so there has been a constraint on investment in favor of the shareholder buybacks that Senator Heinrich was referring to. But most importantly, in the most recent, is that supply has come off the market in terms of Russian oil and gas, rightly because of countries like the United States saying we will not buy oil from you in order to finance Putin's war. If 1.5 million to 2 million barrels comes off, that means the global supply has reduced, and since oil's traded on a global market.
So you do not believe any of your policies have impacted the supply of oil and gas in this country?
Nor does the CEOs of the oil and gas industries, 94% of whom have said that the failure to produce more have nothing to do with the policies of government.
Yeah, I would argue that point, and I think most Americans would as well. I grew up in the oil and gas industry. I'm still connected to it, and those folks are afraid to invest because of your policies, your over-aggressive policies. And I just hope that your economists would stop and take responsibility that the decreased supply in this country is what has led to the increased price, and your policies are responsible for that. I understand that oil is a world commodity, but when we were a net exporter of oil, we weren't as dependent upon that world market. So you could say the same thing about it. Wheat is a world commodity, but if there's enough of it to feed ourselves, certainly gives us much more control. I do think your policies have contributed significantly to this, and fear of investing. People are so scared to invest in this because it takes a year or two to turn this product around. It's not like turning a flip a switch on and off. I want to go back to inflation just for a second more. My son called me in January and said his utility price had doubled. He said, "Dad, is this a mistake or what's happened? Why do you think utility prices have doubled in America?"
I think utility prices, fuel prices, are constrained by the same things that we are seeing in other inflation-affected areas, which is supply chains are slow to catch up with the opening up of the economy after COVID. I think that is a big reason for the inflation, in addition to, as we've discussed, the price of fuel, which is a global price, the price of oil.
What policies are you implementing now that'll decrease the price of gasoline at the pump and decrease my son's utility bill?
Well, as you know, oil, which gasoline derives from, is traded on a global market. And what the president has done is try to replace the lost barrels of oil from the Russian oil that has been pulled off the market by releasing 180 million barrels, million barrels per day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The Energy Information Agency has said that the oil and gas industry will be ramping up, and they have started to do so slowly, to be increasing to another million barrels per day by the end of this year. They will be at record production by the end of this year. We are at record production for natural gas production and natural gas export. This administration, to your point about instituting policies, has issued more permits for oil and gas drilling in the first year
that's totally deceitful to describe that as a solution. You only issued about 10 or 20% of what we needed, and then you don't allow us to build the infrastructure of what we would need to do as well. So I think that's just disingenuous to go down that rabbit hole as well. But thank you. I'm over my time.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's put this to bed because I think the facts are important. And Secretary Granholm, I do think it is important to talk about the Biden policy because we are talking about supply and demand. So correct me if I am wrong, because in fact, the BLM under the Biden administration has approved more permits to drill last year for oil and gas than it did in the first 3 years of the Trump administration.
Correct.
And oil production on federal public lands is higher now than at any point since at least 2003.
Correct.
And the oil and gas industry has more than 9,100 approved permits to drill that have not yet been put in use, and 14 million acres of leased public lands that have not yet been put into production. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. Because I do think my consumers across the country, we need to deal in facts. We really do. The truth matters. It still does, including in this body. So let me jump to something else, Secretary Granholm, that you and I have talked about. And thank you for coming to Nevada. Thank you for talking, really focusing on what we are doing to make these big, bold investments that you have talked about. One of the things you and I have talked about are nuclear waste and consent-based siting. And as you, the President and the administration have repeatedly stated, that Yucca Mountain is not a viable solution for a repository. Instead, there is an urgent need for the U.S. to incorporate the consent-based framework and findings of the 2012 Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future. With this in mind, I am interested to learn more about the $53 million request for the consent-based siting process in the department's fiscal year 2023 budget. So can you please elaborate on this request and explain how you intend for these funds to contribute to the department's consent-based efforts, should it be appropriated by Congress?
Yes. As you know, first of all, the consent-based siting process has begun in that our Office of Nuclear Energy put out a request for information, for seeing whether there is some interest on the part of communities across the country who would be willing to have this discussion. That request for information resulted in over 200 comments. You know, some were in favor, some opposed. Those comments are being evaluated and will be made public, I think, within the next couple of weeks. The next step is to be able to put out a funding opportunity announcement to begin this conversation. And so that funding that you describe, I think it may be a little bit less than that, but the funding that is in the budget for that is to be able to begin that conversation and have, understand the needs of communities who might be willing. As you noted, Yucca Mountain is off the table. So the question is, are there communities that may have, you know, the openness to be able to do that? Obviously, we'd have to come back to Congress. There would be some need to compensate communities for their willingness to do this, and obviously compensate them for any infrastructure that would be necessary. But that process has begun, and the second step of it will happen, I believe, in early fall, where we'll issue the funding opportunity announcement to begin that conversation.
Thank you. Yep. I appreciate that. Let me ask you on hydrogen, because you were just with me in Nevada, and thank you so much for taking a tour of the new Air Liquide hydrogen facility in North Las Vegas with me last month. I was pleased to see that the fiscal year 23 budget featured a 24% boost for the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies program within the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. How does the fiscal year 23 budget ensure that clean energy is utilized in applications that represent a clear pathway for systemically reducing carbon emissions?
Yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about what Congress has done in providing the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, for example, for hydrogen hubs, is that it allows for the stages of research that have been happening in hydrogen, and I'm assuming your question is related to hydrogen, actually get deployed, and we get to see a variety of applications. So, you know, the Air Liquide site that we saw potentially could have been using gas from landfill waste. That's one feed stream that we might be looking at, or natural gas, or renewable energy. And so the research that's been done on hydrogen and being done, it's a cross-cut across the department, because there's some fossil feedstocks and there's some renewable feedstocks, but it will be informing the hydrogen hub FOA, the funding opportunity announcements, and then the awards. So the research part and the deployment part are tied very closely, and that's why we've got to keep the research part very active.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here.
Great.
And I've enjoyed our offline communications. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think an ongoing issue of debate is whether or not the administration is or is not encouraging industry to produce oil and gas. And this has all the implications at the gas pump that the mom sitting at home who can't afford her gas and she can't afford an electric vehicle, or a pickup truck is 15 years old, she's frustrated and she would like to have answers. So with that, I approach this conversation. And we know that if the administration sent signals, you rightly say that you can't turn on production like that, but if the administration sent signals now that there was going to be increased production, futures prices would fall. There's an inverse correlation between supply and price, and if investors are assured about future supply, then price can have a downward pressure now. So all this is beyond finger pointing. It is reality as to the implications for that mom sitting at home, unable to afford a nice new electric car. So with that said, I think it's important to note that you've mentioned some oil companies saying that government regulation is not an issue. But I think it's important to say that the independent producers feel as if it is. And the IPAA, their members, produce 80% of the oil that is consumed in our nation. They sent a letter dated March 18th, to the president, in which they say specifically, government actions are chilling the ability of them to produce. My colleague from Nevada rightly points out there's a lot of leases out there. The folks from the IPAA who make 80% of the wells, so 80% of the oil, say that leases are ineffective without a permit, and that the amount of permitting that has been allowed in 2022 has dramatically fallen off from the permits in 2021. They also point out that there's a big pressure, rightly so, a big pressure to limit methane release when they associated gas when they are producing. But if you're going to limit methane release, you have to have the permits for the gathering pipelines in order to capture that methane. And those permits, as we've discussed before, have been incredibly hard to come by. So on the one hand, don't produce the methane, but on the other hand, we're not going to give you the permit to have the pipeline to gather the methane so that it can be shipped elsewhere. But if you release that methane, we've got a rule we're about to club you with. Now, I think everything I'm saying is frankly indisputable. I can show you the regulations that have had a chilling effect upon the financing of these projects. And it can be the Department of Labor rule, reversing a Trump administration rule as regards the rule of the ability of investor funds to use ESG as a criteria by whom to fund. This administration's Department of Labor is allowing ESG to play the role, which is chilling the financing. It can be this SEC rule, which is telling the companies you've got to come up with your upstream and downstream emissions profile so that investor community should take this into account. I mean, how I use my gasoline is going to impact how one of these publicly held independents is going to be viewed by the investor community. That is this administration's rule. 3 Democrats voted for it, 1 Republican voted against it. And so as you speak of the financing mechanism, clearly financing is having a role here, and the administration is enabling financing to be inhibited. There was some progress where the Ex-Im Bank said they begin to do domestic production. The Make More in America initiative. It was approved by the board on April 14th. But it's on renewables, energy storage, semiconductors, biotech. There's nothing about fossil. Now, we're now in a scenario where if the Chinese decide to help fund one of these projects that otherwise cannot get funding because of everything I've just described, they can buy our natural gas at Henry Hub and sell it on the open market 3 to 4 times the price because we can't get domestic financing. And that's a plausible scenario. I think the reason that we're so frustrated is that if you look at the reality the context of this administration's attitude towards fossil, you've killed financing. I hate to be accusatory, but talk to the IPAA. Those folks can't get the financing they once did. If the administration, on the other hand, going back to my original point, sends the signal that over the next year and the next 3 years, we're going to do our best to help financing, you're going to put a downward pressure on that price. And that mom will be able to spend some of her disposable income on a night out to movies with her husband, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I got to fill up my 15-year-old pickup truck, and I sure wish I could afford an electric vehicle, but that is beyond my means because I'm paying everything for higher prices. And I don't usually spend my whole time venting. I apologize. But I feel like there has to be some context to these valid points. But when you look at the dadgum reality, Department of Labor, SEC, FERC, doing everything they can, BOEM, everything they can to kill domestic production. Financial markets have picked up on it, and so these folks can't get capital, and that was their complaint. I apologize for spending my whole time complaining, but I just felt like there had to be some context. I yield.
Thank you, Senator. If I'm going to add to that because there's some conversations going on, some negotiations that have been very, very fruitful. Everything you have said is absolutely correct. We've been working with that. The administration has acknowledged that we all have to be in this together. And right now, putting a fee on methane when it's not even feasible to be able to take the methane off and take it to market. So it's just basically designed to take someone out of business or put them out of business.
By the way, because FERC won't give the pipeline to gather it?
Well, let me just tell you this. We are working on negotiations that they will not be able to imply a methane fee if a pipeline is prohibited from being able to take the methane off. So you're either with us and we're all in this together, and we understand we have to have infrastructure, or we're not. And we're making some good movement on this. And I can tell you I feel very strongly about that. And I said that we have to have reliable, dependable, and affordable. And we have to reduce our emissions. We've talked about this. They're getting it. They understand it. Let's just see what happens, the end result. But we've had, between us and EPW, Senator Carper and Senator Capito and their committee has been working with us, and I think we've got good movement on this. Some reasonable things. Okay, I'm sorry. Senator Kelly, if you will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, I want to discuss a little bit about Russian oil for a second here. I understand that, and this is with regards to the SPR. The SPR can be used to store oil from and for foreign nations. In fact, there was an estimated 25 million barrels of Russian oil in the reserve, and this is according to DOE reports published last year. Currently, I strongly feel that we must be certain that no Russian oil enters the reserve, and that includes oil from companies still active in Russia. Oil service companies, U.S. companies, that were doing business in Russia claim to be winding down operations. But if you just look at some of these companies' websites, the last thing they have said about operations in Russia were 7 weeks ago, in March. March 18th, Schlumberger said, and this is a quote, immediately suspend new investment and technology deployment to our Russian operations. On the same day, Halliburton, it's a little bit better, Halliburton said, and I quote, "We'll prioritize safety and reliability." I'm not sure why reliability matters so much if you're winding down operations, but prioritize safety and reliability as we wind down operations in Russia. Baker Hughes the next day, this is another quote, suspended new operations and fulfills current contractual obligations. That doesn't sound like winding down operations in Russia. It sounds like not starting anything new. All of these three companies are listed on the New York Stock Exchange, have headquarters here in the United States. And other producers certainly could be evading sanctions by blending their own oil with Russian oil at sea. So, Secretary Granholm, I want to find out, what do you know about U.S. oil services companies continuing to operate in Russia?
I only know what's been publicly reported as well. And I think your point underneath what you are saying here is very valid, that we should be encouraging with whatever tools we have, to have full withdrawal from Russia, to not assist in any way in the regime that is engaged in these atrocities.
Because especially Schlumberger and Baker Hughes, I mean, just what they have said, it just sounds like that they're going to continue business as usual and just not do anything new. And that really concerns me. So I appreciate that. I think the administration should take a long and a hard look at this and see what more we can do. And if there is wind down claims, how do we confirm the accuracy of these claims? And if in some cases they're not even claiming to wind down existing operations, and that really concerns me. And with regards to the SPR, I would like a written response from the department on how it will certify that no business operating in Russia is involved in the storage of oil in our strategic reserve. And then I got one final question for you, and this is, again, with regards to the SPR. Will the department use the revenue from recent sales to refill the SPR with domestic oil and expand its maximum capacity from about 700 million barrels to 1 billion barrels of oil?
Well, I think the maximum capacity is just over 700 million. We'd have to build out new facilities in order to do that. I will say that today we're announcing the start of the buyback plan, and this is partly, Senator Cassidy, I know you and I have had this discussion about how to refill the SPR by sending those downward price signals. And so the first part of that will be today. We'll be announcing a future call starting in the fall for producers who will replenish the first chunk, and we'll do a series of these so that we can continue to replenish and give the price signals that you were describing to the oil and gas industry, that there will be future opportunity, obviously American-made.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have, let me see, Senator Daines. He snuck right in there.
Did. Chair Manchin, thank you. Senator Secretary Granholm, welcome back to the committee. Over the past month, I've met with several Eastern European leaders, prime ministers, presidents, direct face-to-face conversations about Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine. The wrath of Putin's invasion has been felt throughout Europe and the world. Many have called what happened on February 24th Europe's 9/11, and it served and should continue to serve as a wake-up call for many countries. Vladimir Putin has weaponized energy. That message was clear from every leader I met with. I had Ukrainian leaders in my office back in September from Odessa pleading with us to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They said Vladimir Putin has weaponized energy. It fell on deaf ears in the administration. It wasn't until after the invasion we finally started to see some action from the Biden administration on that pipeline. They want and they need the United States to step up and help cut off Russia's energy dominance in the region and help supply them with American-made energy. That includes oil, it includes natural gas, as well as cutting-edge nuclear energy technology, which all provide reliable baseload power. Unfortunately, President Biden hasn't seemed to get this message, as he remains laser-focused on hampering Made in America energy. Instead of supporting American energy and supporting our allies, he's looking to other world leaders. But it's clear the world is safer when the United States leads in energy production. It will not only undermine Putin's energy stranglehold on Europe, it will create more American jobs. We can do this by opening up more LNG ports, working with countries to remove costly barriers for energy imports, and supporting more nuclear plants. Secretary Granholm, I was encouraged to see you recently approve LNG export authorizations. Thank you. We do need to do more. The question is, what is the Department of Energy doing to reduce barriers and increase energy trade with Europe?
We are certainly part of making sure that enough volumes of liquefied natural gas go to Europe, which is, of course, what they have been asking for as they contemplate what they are doing with respect to both gas and oil, Europe. As you noted, we have permitted every LNG terminal that has been requested of us that is in our domestic space. So there are no pending permits. They have all been permitted. There are 2 in Mexico that have not begun construction, and for other reasons are not on hold, but we are looking at those. But the others have all been permitted. We've also permitted an additional, we, meaning the last administration, had permitted and are still waiting, an additional 30 billion cubic feet of liquefied natural gas from terminals, about 12 additional projects that are looking at financing. So we believe that it is important for us to be allied in supplying the liquefied natural gas to Europe. The President has called for, by the end of this year, an additional 15 billion cubic meters.
The Europeans, I mean, the fear is in their eyes. You
Yep.
saw the Russians shut off Bulgaria and Poland.
Yep.
I mean, it's very, very serious. The inflationary pressures, what this means here, we're literally Vladimir Putin has got Europe over a barrel right now.
Yep.
And we warned the Europeans about that. We tried to warn the administration about that. I am concerned about our own country, that with this this kind of anti-energy philosophy we see, and I appreciate we do in the LNG, but it just concerns me we don't put America in the same position at some point. I want to move on to carbon capture technology. I just was in eastern Montana last week celebrating the successful opening of a CO2 pipeline that will move CO2 captured at a helium processing operation in Wyoming and injecting it back into the ground for enhanced oil recovery so we can sequester carbon and actually extract more oil out of some of these oil wells that are 50 to 60 years old. It's the type of project I think we need to be supporting to reduce carbon emissions. What is DOE doing to support carbon capture solutions in Montana, both in the energy and the industrial sectors?
Yeah, thank you for asking. In fact, today we are putting out a notice of intent on carbon capture, particularly in this portion, it's $2.5 billion, saying that we are looking for places that have good geology to be able to store the carbon. We want to characterize and verify where might be in the country the best places to store CO2. And obviously, the region that you are in is got a lot of good geology to be able to do that. So you should take a
Thank
look.
you. And I'm out of time. A follow-up, just a quick question. We asked for a report on the jobs lost with Keystone XL pipeline cancellation. That was due on February 13th. I just asked if you would follow up with that and get that report back to us. I will tell you, as European leaders tried to process why our president canceled an oil pipeline, why he stopped new leases on federal lands, the response from our leaders is, what in the world are you doing over in America? So thank you.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Secretary Granholm, let me just first say it's always a pleasure to have a former governor before us, because I don't feel any reluctance to ask wonky, granular questions. And I appreciate your coming here today, but I appreciate your service and the fact you come back into government at this level and put up with a lot of challenges through a very, very difficult couple of years. You're to be commended. Last year in Colorado, we enacted bipartisan legislation that requires our transmission utilities to join a organized wholesale market by 2030. And obviously, we're pushing the potential to promote grid reliability and efficiency. Hopefully, it will lower costs. I think there's great opportunity to lower costs in rural parts of the state. The Department of Energy's budget establishes wholesale electricity market technical assistance and grants program. And I was just going to ask you if you could talk a little bit about how this program could help Colorado and other western states voluntarily explore their options with respect to these wholesale electricity markets.
Yeah, we would love to see a Western regional transmission organization so that the states in the West that now have individual markets might be able to share generation of energy among each other. I mean, if there is an oversupply of of solar in Arizona, for example, and a need in Colorado to be able to ship the electrons across through a regional transmission organization that would also prioritize cost. It could lower cost for people who are in that region, as well as supply clean energy, and just make better bulk purchasing decisions. They have these regional markets, of course, in a number of places in the country, and I think the West could benefit from it, too.
We will be applying for some of the technical assistance. And it is, if you think about it in terms of, as a metaphor for as world trade, the more trading you do with more different countries, basically everyone gets benefit. If you can,
right.
keep people's tempers down and make sure everyone gets along and has the same forward vision, there's great benefit to collaborating like that. Let's see what the I wanted to hear a little bit about, you put a lot of effort into the R&D in terms of the effort to get to net zero by 2030. And I just wanted to hear how that, so much R&D is, I support it 100%. In other words, I believe that we've got to continue investing in the research on every level if we're going to address climate change successfully and make sure that people don't get killed at the pump when they're filling their gasoline tanks. How's that going? Is the R&D, do you feel you're still on track to get to net zero by 2030?
Yes, I mean, by 2050. But
I mean,
yes,
2050.
we have put forth a number of big goals in terms of cost reductions for clean energy, for example. So we've launched a number on the R&D side of earth shots. One earth shot to reduce the cost of hydrogen, of clean hydrogen, for example, to $1 for 1 kilogram within the decade. Same to reduce the cost of carbon dioxide removal, atmospheric as well as terrestrial. We've launching this earth shot on long duration storage to reduce the cost of long duration storage by 90%, and that, of course, is utility scale storage, which would make wind and solar essentially baseload power if we could crack the code on that. We've launched goals to reduce the cost of solar and wind to just pennies per kilowatt hour. Same thing with offshore wind. So if we're able to continue to move down these, and there's all sorts of there's all kinds of research going on the continuous improvement and taking them to scale, which is partially what the bipartisan infrastructure law allows us to do, is to take some of those ideas to scale so that we then can continue the downward price on cost for everyday citizens.
Right, that 2030 was you were going to reduce the cost of solar by 50%, I think.
Correct.
I conflated those two things. But all these goals, I mean, I think that the efforts and the focus that you're bringing to that is probably some of the most important work that's being done to address climate change anywhere. So again, Godspeed. I've got a bunch of other questions. I'm out of time, so I'll yield back my 16 seconds
Thank you.
back, but I will submit the questions separately.
Very good.
Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Granholm, for being here today. Maria Robinson, who's been nominated by President Biden to lead the Department of Energy's Office of Electricity, recently stated that she doesn't believe that the residents of her home state, Massachusetts, pay too much for energy. Yet people of Massachusetts are paying energy costs at a rate 72% higher than the national average. What do you think about this? Do you think paying 72% more than the national average, which is already significant and people are feeling the pinch, is that too much to pay for electricity?
I think paying anything more than is absolutely necessary is too much. I don't know when she said that statement. I don't know if it's taken out of context, but we'd all like to see the price of energy reduced.
Right. Now, it is, of course, the statutory purpose of the Department of Energy to provide, quote, an adequate and reliable supply of energy at the lowest reasonable cost. So I believe it's clear that Ms. Robinson's views are not compatible with that mission. And if you review the statement and conclude that it wasn't taken out of context, that it was sufficiently in context, that you can't differentiate it, you can't set it aside as something that didn't apply here somehow, I assume you would advise that the nomination be withdrawn?
No, and when was it said?
It was, so these were very recent. These were in her questions for the record to the committee when she came through the nomination process, which we've received in the last few days, a few months. No, it's been a few months now. So these are recent, and it is concerning. Yeah, so when asked whether she believed that the cost of electricity in Massachusetts was too much, she provided a one-word answer, no. So this was not in a larger context. That's troubling to me. Any response to that?
You know, again, I have not seen what she was responding to. I don't know exactly when it was submitted, but I do think we should be lowering the cost of fuel all the way around.
Right. In today's New York Times, electric bills are latest to spike. So Americans are feeling the pinch when they buy everything from housing to health care, gasoline to groceries. And now electric bills are spiking. So to have somebody who's nominated to head the Office of Electricity within the department whose whole job is to provide, quote, an adequate and reliable supply of energy at the lowest reasonable cost, it seems a mistake to me. It seems tone deaf to the American people who are suffering. Now, energy reliability is also a concern. Since this administration has taken office, it hasn't done anything, as far as I can tell, to address our growing dependence on intermittent sources of energy like wind. For instance, the Biden administration has actually advocated for the extension of the production tax credit, the one that subsidizes these intermittent sources like wind. Now, are you aware that in some places the production tax credit actually provides federal subsidies to wind energy to the point that producers are actually paying people to consume the energy that these producers are making?
I'd like to see your information on that.
Okay, I'd be happy to provide it. I assume you're can't imagine that you're disputing the fact that it does occur.
What I know is that we have to provide American energy with a silver buckshot approach, not a silver bullet approach. We have to be investing in the production of clean energy. We have to be investing in the technology to get us to those energy sources, and including the decarbonization of the existing fossil fuel industry.
Okay, decarbonization of the existing fossil fuel industry is not your mission. Your mission is to provide an affordable, an adequate and reliable source of energy at the lowest reasonable cost. If you're not determined to advance that mission, in fact, if you're undertaking other efforts that do that, then we have a problem. You know, if the department doesn't want to pursue the statutory mandate for which it was created, perhaps the department should not exist. Would you dispute, Madam Secretary, at a minimum, this shows a market distortion, that it creates a market distortion? The minute you're federally subsidizing something to the point that you're actually paying people to consume electricity, does that not create market distortions?
We have federal subsidies for all kinds of energy, including fossil fuels. So the question is, do we want to see the United States build on these energy sources or do we have to rely upon technology or fuel from others? And we need, in the United States, to become American energy independent, and that includes the technology for clean energy as well.
Yes, but those sources, at least, are base load power. Base load power is something that's essential. It is the sine qua non of your ability to fulfill your statutory mandate to make sure that Americans have access to an adequate and reliable supply of energy at the lowest reasonable cost. And at a minimum, I would imagine that you would have to concede, that you would want to concede. I don't know why you would even try to dispute the fact that the minute we're subsidizing, the question of whether, to what extent, in what ways we should subsidize this or that source of energy, that is a different question than the one I'm asking. I'm asking whether, when we get to the point where we're subsidizing something, wind here, to the point that the producers of that energy are actually paying people to consume it, does that not reflect that something's dangerously wrong and that we're creating market distortions.
No, it does not. It says that we want to further this energy source. And if you add batteries to renewable, they essentially become a form of base load power. So that's why the technology that is being worked on at the Department of Energy and the investments that this Congress has made in the bipartisan infrastructure law on battery technology are so important to create clean, dispatchable base load power. And yes, we are competing globally for this, and so we want to make sure that we've got adequate supply, and that means early stage technologies often require some kind of subsidy. And even very well established technologies like oil and gas are benefiting from subsidy as well.
Does that technology exist today?
Yes.
To provide base load power. Base load power.
The technology exists in terms of battery storage, and we are continuing to improve it. But the question is, if we take it to scale, can we make it more affordable?
And in the meantime, we're creating a massive market distortion that's perpetuating high energy prices. This is why the American people are suffering. This is why the American people are being left out. They're being told they can go eat cake, and I find that unacceptable. Thank you.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, Senator Granholm, we're having a community climate and energy conference in Maine in June. Governor Mills has asked me to convey an invitation to you. We'd love to have you. June is a great time to visit Maine, so please see if that's a possibility.
Will do.
Thank you. This has been a fascinating discussion, and instead of mixing apples and oranges, we've been mixing gas and oil. Let's talk about them separately. As you kept trying to point out to Senator Marshall, oil is a global commodity. The price of oil is affected marginally by what's going on in the U.S., but it's affected by everything from Iran's sanctions to Russia's removal from the market to how oil is produced in Venezuela or Nigeria. It's a worldwide commodity. It's not something that we can set. The oil companies wake up in the morning and they look in the Wall Street Journal, and if it says it's $101 a barrel Brent crude, that's the price. The high price of gasoline is a reflection of the high price of oil, and the high price of oil is a reflection of the global market. I was in Germany with Senator Marshall. I did the calculation. We drove by in the buses, gas stations, they're paying $8.50 a gallon. Not $5, not $4.50. At that time, it was almost exactly double the price in the United States. So to blame Governor Biden, or President Biden, or anybody else, you and I are governors, that's what's in my mind, President Biden or any other individual for the price of worldwide price of oil to, the Keystone Pipeline is just nonsense. So I think we really need to be clear about that. The high price of oil is a global price that's high everywhere in the world. The inflation of gasoline is high everywhere in the world, and in fact, in many places in the world is worse than here. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, let's talk about natural gas. Electric bills, as Senator points out, are going up. Why? Because natural gas is going up. Why? In my view, talking about regulations on methane is, as my mother used to say, straining at gnats and swallowing camels. The camel here is exports of natural gas, and this is where I take issue with you, because you proudly said we have approved every applicant for LNG. Approved applications now constitute 57% of U.S. production. Natural gas is not a global commodity. It's a local commodity. The price has been very different here. It was about $3.50 here per million BTUs, and it was $13 or $14 in China. That's an advantage to the United States. We have now vastly increased the capacity for exports, supply and demand. We have dramatically increased the worldwide demand for our natural gas. We are now the largest LNG exporters. I sat in this committee 5 years ago with a representative of the natural gas industry. He said, we will never go above 9% of our production, so it won't affect domestic prices. Well, we're now at about 15%. We're headed for over 50%. That's what happened in Australia. Natural gas prices domestically in Australia almost tripled. And it's already happening here. So my colleagues argue about we got to export more, and I understand helping the Europeans and dealing with Russia. The problem is we're building 35-year assets in terms of LNG. We're going to be committed to 50% of LNG. LNG, gas is going to become a global commodity, and our advantage vis-a-vis China is going to be eliminated. 13% of our LNG now goes to China. We're exporting our advantage in price. I hope that you will take a closer look at these applications because the standard is supposed to be the public interest. I believe domestic natural gas prices are part of the public interest. Can you give me some thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks for raising it. And it's, you know, your point about the supply of natural gas and whether it is increasing to accommodate the increased volumes of production or whether it is a zero sum is an important point. I know that a couple of years ago, I think in 2018, our fossil energy office, then fossil energy office, did a study to determine whether, in fact, increases of exports caused prices to go up in the United States. At that point, it said no, basically. The Energy Information Agency, because of the increases that we're seeing, is looking at this again, and they will have a report out hopefully by the end of this year. Let me just say,
I hope before you make more approvals of these long-term commitments that you will have that data in hand, because it's hard for me to believe that 57, from zero to, it was 0 6 years ago, to 57% of daily production isn't going to affect domestic prices.
yeah, and I will just say on the 4 permits that we just granted, that was those were permits requested to take existing volumes that would have been sent to non-free trade agreements, to free trade agreement countries, and allow them to be diverted to Europe. So it wasn't an increase in volume as much as it was a permission to allow non-free trade agreement countries to be able to get
and, and I want to support the Europeans, and I think getting them off Russian oil and gas is an absolutely important geopolitical decision on our part. But I also want people to realize that there's a price to be paid and that we're going to be paying that price in terms of electricity because largely in many areas in New England comes from natural gas. Our electricity bills have skyrocketed. Why? Because natural gas prices have skyrocketed. Why? In part because of a lack of investment in production, but I believe in part because of a substantial increase in exports. And so, you know, let's not point fingers and say it's any individual's fault. This is a worldwide problem, but part of the fault, I believe, is that we have to really think hard about this policy of wholesale exports of natural gas unless domestic production significantly increases. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, with all due respect, if we could get a good pipeline up to you all Northeast, we give you a lot of West Virginia gas.
I totally agree. I totally agree, and that's one of the major issues is pipeline capacity. That's why the Marcellus and the
Marcellus Shale and
Utica, you can't get the gas out.
Marcellus and Utica would take care of the Northeast more than enough.
When I was governor of Maine, we permitted a greenfield pipeline project from Nova Scotia to Boston through the state. I helped work with the companies to do that.
We can build you one and also be able to be coated to where it can carry hydrogen too as we transition in and be able to give you both. Senator Smith, Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly want to be associated with Senator Cassidy's remarks. I think that since we have been in these circumstances, he put it so eloquently of exactly what's going on there. And I can't imagine, Governor Granholm, how hard your job is. When I go to Mississippi, whether it's in the grocery store or at church, I can't take 2 steps without just being covered with, can you please explain to me why this administration shut down the Keystone Pipeline? Can you please explain to me why immediately our gas prices are to the point where we cannot afford them? And it's really hit everybody in the country, and it's hit everybody in Mississippi, including the industry of our ag products when they have to fill up those big trucks to take products to harvest, and they have to buy 150 gallons at a time. It is devastating, to say the least. But we've talked about natural gas, we've talked about infrastructure and the permitting process, but the data from the Energy Information Administration shows that natural gas is the most affordable way to heat homes and that gas appliances deliver significant savings for consumers. Plus, the EPA states residential natural gas use accounts for less than 5% of the U.S. emissions. So why does the proposed funding for clean energy infrastructure programs, such as the $150 million for tribal homes and colleges to transition to renewable energy, it does not even allow for natural gas? Can you answer that?
One of the reasons why the focus is on renewable energy is because renewable energy can be produced right there on site, doesn't require additional infrastructure. It can be produced and dispatched with microgrids, for example, for tribal communities. They're very interested in that. And the ones that we are in lots of conversations with tribes across the country, and they're very interested in using the resources that from the sun and the wind to be able to produce energy for their people. There are 30,000 tribal homes that don't even have energy at all, and so they want to get it quickly. They want to get it in a way that's cheap, and so renewable energy is a choice that they've made.
And so natural gas is completely eliminated and not even allowed?
In terms of the focus that we are bringing on it, we are focused on renewable sources and renewable technologies, because natural gas technology is well along. And, of course, there's always the methane issue with respect to natural gas, though natural gas, many of the natural gas producers are very enthused about making sure that they button down their pipelines, that there aren't methane releases. But methane, of course, is an extremely potent greenhouse gas emission, and we would want to partner with the natural gas producers to make sure that they will eliminate those methane emissions.
And we've talked about the effects on Americans, Vladimir Putin's effect on America's lives here at home. And I agree with your written testimony that I read, in which you state the impact on gas prices has highlighted the national security importance of the energy investments. And I can also appreciate the need for clean energy, but it will take years or decades to move away from using oil and gas. And so American families and businesses, you know, they're hurting right now. What investments is your department making into U.S. energy security that will help the situation we're facing right now, not 10 or 20 years down the road?
I think we have to do both. We have to focus on the now, which is why we're calling for increased production of oil and gas. It's why we've released from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is the big tool that we have. It's why I've been, the Department of Energy has been agreeing to the permits for liquefied natural gas as well. It's why the administration has been so quickly permitting. The question is, what can we do both on the immediate as well as with our eye on the long term? And that's why investments in both the technology and the deployment of renewable have to happen also. So American-made energy can make us energy independent and can increase our security. And I think that this focus on it has to be fossil or it has to be renewable. We can clean up the fossil side, and we can invest in renewable, and that's the mission of the Department of Energy.
And I guess because it is such an aggressive mission, that's the reason, you know, during that time period, you know, we literally have businesses that are closing because they just simply cannot afford the energy cost associated with the businesses and transactions that they're obligated to. And, I just think that it's a pretty aggressive mission and maybe not enough time given to these businesses and these companies to adjust and for 10 to 20 years down the road of the infrastructure that would be there.
The goal is to get to net zero by 2050, so we do have a transition period. And in the meantime, like right now, the administration is helping with, for example, low-income home energy assistance, $100 billion for that, making sure that we're making sure we're also releasing funds for the weatherization program to help everyday citizens reduce their costs and weatherize their homes. So the administration is very focused on both the now and trying to relieve the pain that they can, increase supply, but also invest in the future.
My time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Highsmith. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Yes, there is a lot of concern about the price of gas at the pump, and it is impacting all of our families. And Hawaii faces one of the highest prices in the country for a gallon of gasoline. It's around $5.27 per gallon. That's the highest in the country. And skyrocketing oil prices in 2008 solidified Hawaii's commitment to move toward renewable power. So we are now at about 30% toward our goal of 100% renewable power by 2045, but that doesn't include gasoline. We're talking about electricity. How will the president's budget help us to accelerate the transition to renewable power, electric vehicles, and other zero-emission transportation options so that we are not dependent on the whims of Russia, OPEC, and the global oil markets?
Yeah, we know that, for example, people can't afford today, not everybody can afford today, an electric vehicle. And so we want to make sure that we bring down the price of that vehicle. And the reason why that vehicle in many models is expensive is because of the price of the battery. And so we are all in at the Department of Energy in bringing down the price of the battery, both through technology, making sure that we are building out the supply chain for that battery inside of the United States so we can control the inputs for it. So that's one thing. And the second thing I'm hopeful that this Congress will do is to extend and expand upon the tax credits that will reduce the price of the electric vehicle at the dealership. And that is something that I think would be a great assistance for folks who are paying over $5 a gallon today.
Does the president's budget include tax credits for electric vehicles?
No, the president's budget does not include the tax credits. We're hopeful that Congress will approve them in the very near future.
Why didn't he include that then? Never mind. I think that's a rhetorical question. Thank you for saying that we need to do more to encourage the lowering the price and affordability of electric vehicles. I agree with you. So, island states, well, Hawaii, and remote communities in our country, we face unique barriers to accessing affordable, sustainable, and clean energy. And DOE's Energy Transition Initiative Program, the ETIs, support communities like those in Hawaii, energy transition efforts by facilitating the sharing of best practices and providing important technical support. And I know you are well aware that places like Hawaii and remote areas that are subject to huge, vulnerable to severe weather conditions, and that there's disruptions to our energy as a result. So construction of microgrids in places like Hawaii and remote areas is really important. And the ETI is currently helping assess which communities on Oahu could most benefit from microgrids, and on Kauai, it is doing much the same thing. Can you explain more about how the Energy Transition Initiative is helping remote and island communities address high energy costs and unreliable infrastructure, and what impact additional funding for the program would have on communities in states like Hawaii?
Yeah, the 2023 budget is requesting an additional $34 million to be able to support that program in the theory that no community should be left behind, and islanded communities are often overlooked, and we want to make sure we take advantage of the natural assets they have to be able to move toward clean energy. So, for example, in Hawaii, you've got so much geothermal, which is a huge opportunity. It's one of the reasons why Hawaii is such a robust renewable portfolio standard. But there are other issues related to that. How do you get access to that power? And microgrids are one solution. Offshore wind, solar, there's so many renewable solutions, but you also have to add battery technology. So the point is you have to have technical assistance for these communities to be able to see what the options are based upon their comparative advantages, and that's what this program does.
Thank you. I just want to note that with regard to geothermal, there are very important cultural issues that exist in Hawaii with regard to resorting to geothermal. I know that you already asked about the investigation that is being conducted by the Commerce Department relating to solar components and the possibility of additional tariffs that this part of our industry is facing. So my question is, what resources could the DOE make available to address short-term impacts on solar projects and address longer-term issues relating to the solar supply chain?
Well, it does beg the question about building out the full supply chain for solar inside the United States so we don't have to worry about the import issue. And that's why one of the President's requests of Congress is for example, Solar Energy Manufacturing Act, which would help to bring down the cost of manufacturing solar in the United States and all the components included. We're very supportive of that. We're also supportive, of course, of being able to use the advanced manufacturing tools that have been provided through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act to accelerate solar. We've got a request in our energy efficiency and renewable energy budget for a solar accelerator to advance solar manufacturing in the United States. That's $200 million we're requesting in this budget for.
Mr. Chairman, all of that is going to have to happen pretty fast because the solar projects are coming to a screeching halt as a result of the potential outcome of the Commerce Department's investigation. So I hope that your department can figure out how you can be of help right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Horn. I have a couple additional questions. I know Senator King does as well. I just wanted to ask about LNG exports. I think we need to do everything we can to cut off funds to Russia's war machine, and we've heard Senator King's comments. To me, that includes Russia money they're receiving from natural gas, and we, I believe, have an abundance of natural gas to support our allies, partners in Europe. Some of it is still in the ground. Some of it we don't have the pipelines for. I think we need the export potential, the infrastructure. You know, you referenced that there were 2 more applications for facilities in Mexico which use natural gas from Rocky Mountain states. These applications have been pending, I know, since the start of the administration. When can we expect the department to act on these 2 applications?
Yeah, those applications, the terminals are not even under construction yet. Yeah. We are taking a look at it. We're also looking at what is happening in Mexico with respect to their energy reform, and have concerns about that and the questions that have been raised about violation of the USMCA. So we're watching all of that. Know that we are well aware that those are pending, and since they're not under construction yet, and we are watching what's happening in Mexico, we are taking all that into consideration.
Yeah, my thought was that if we approve these applications, or you do, it would send a strong signal to Mexico. So that would be my recommendation. You know, with regard, and we've talked about this by phone, the uranium reserve. Congress gave the department $75 million to establish a strategic uranium reserve back in 2020. During last year's budget hearing, you stated that the department, quote, plans to be ready to start purchasing uranium by the end of calendar year 2021. So the department hadn't made any of that purchasing yet. Last week, you said a funding opportunity announcement would be issued in June. So if the department followed the directions provided by Congress, we would already have the reserve. Will you commit to this committee that the department will purchase uranium this calendar year?
Yes.
Okay. You stated the department would make limited amounts of this high-assay, low-enriched uranium available for advanced reactors. Limited amounts aren't going to get the job done. The 2 advanced reactor demonstration projects, one's going to be sited in Wyoming, one in Senator Cantwell's state of Washington. They think they need about 20 tons of high-assay, low-enriched uranium. The department has uranium that can meet that need. I think you simply need to prioritize that work. Will the department make 20 tons of fuel available for these 2 reactors?
This is all part of the uranium strategy that I'm talking about. We're very committed to making sure we have enough HALEU available for those advanced reactors. And the question is, what's the best way of doing that? We've got to build out the full supply chain here in the United States to be able to do that. And we are focused on that as part of this uranium strategy, which you should be hearing about from Dr. Huff within the month, maybe.
Well, that'd be terrific, because I'm ready to go to the floor and make a speech recommending her confirmation today and the vote scheduled for 1:45 today. You know, you've spoken of the urgent need to increase the domestic supply of critical minerals for renewable energy technologies and EV batteries. You just pointed out the importance of the battery and bringing down the cost of the battery. March 31st, President Biden issued an executive order to increase domestic production of critical minerals. We've had 2 hearings on the topic of what the needs are, what's available right now worldwide. You know, to me, that order doesn't do a thing in terms of addressing the biggest hurdle, preventing more domestic production, because it takes an average of 10 years to obtain a federal mining permit. That's what we heard from people testifying here. Do you think that's too long, and will you support
Yes.
efforts to streamline the permitting process to open new mines?
I do.
Thank you. And then finally, and I want to get to Senator King, we import the majority of our electrical transformers from China today. If we are to meet President Biden's goal of carbon-free power sector that you've talked about, and utilities are going to need to deploy these technologies in huge numbers. And what steps is the department taking to address the resiliency, because you talked specifically resiliency of these components to cyber attacks and Chinese intrusion?
Yeah, fortunately, the bipartisan infrastructure law provides $5 billion for the purpose of making resilient our electric grid. We did the supply chain analysis that identified the transformers as being a huge problem. We should be making them in the United States. That's part of the resiliency effort, but also making the grid itself resilient through technology or undergrounding or other ways that we can make sure that it's either resilient from cyber or from extreme weather events.
Senator King.
Thank you. A couple of specific questions. Storage is incredibly important, as you've testified. That's the only real path to a renewable energy future, because without storage, it is intermittent, and so we need to solve that problem. I know that you're putting a lot of research money. We have put a lot of research money into storage. I hope that you will also emphasize non-battery storage as alternatives.
Non-lithium.
Non-battery. I'm talking about pump storage.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Molten salt and all the other possible flywheels, all the other possible technologies, because I think in the long term, batteries do have issues, and particularly if you're talking grid scale, in terms of availability of minerals, cost, and all of those things. So I don't want the storage research, which I think is one of the most important things that you're doing, to focus entirely on batteries.
Correct. It is the suite of storage.
Great. Second, and this isn't exactly in your field, although CSER is within your office, I'm very worried about the cybersecurity of pipelines. FERC has jurisdiction over the grid, but not pipelines. TSA has jurisdiction over the cybersecurity of pipelines. I think it's, I'm not denigrating TSA, but I have this almost intuitive concern about the cybersecurity of pipelines, because pipelines have become part of the electric grid. In New England, 60% of our electricity comes from gas, all of which comes through pipelines, and if the pipelines are compromised, our grid is down. So I really hope that CSER and that you will work in an interagency way to address this problem. My concern is that it'll fall between the spaces between agencies, and we learned from Colonial Pipeline what a fairly minor cyber attack did to the Southeast supply of gasoline. So
right.
Please put pipeline cybersecurity on your list of priorities.
It is, sir, and the interagency working with TSA and CSER have been very important. I think what we've done on the electric side has been sort of a model for what could happen on the pipeline side.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator King. We do have a number of statements for the record and some submissions. You stated repeatedly the administration is doing nothing to discourage American oil and gas production. So I'd like to enter and ask unanimous consent to enter into the record letters and statements written by oil and gas industry associations asserting that the Biden administration is in fact discouraging energy production. These letters and statements offer recommendations on steps the administration can take today to increase American energy production. So without objection, those will be introduced.